Hello, welcome to this session on domestic revenue mobilization from Addis to Seville and beyond. I am Talita Yamashiro Fordeloni. I'm an advisor on global revenue statistics at the OECD Center for Tax Policy and Administration, and I will be your master of ceremony for today's session. So with that, we're very honored to have speakers from different parts of the globe today. We will start with some opening remarks by Raga Nadotir, who's director at the OECD Development Center. We'll then follow with a presentation by Emmanuel Modica, who's from the OECD Center for Tax and Policy and Administration. She'll provide context from our discussion showing global trends in domestic revenue mobilization from 2015 to 2022 based on revenue data from the Global Revenue Statistics Database. This will be followed by a panel discussion with three panelists from the African Union Commission, from the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and from the Asian Development Bank. They will discuss drivers of progress and key challenges for DRM across regions. And then after the panel discussion, we hope to have time for some questions and answers with our panelists. And we'll conclude with remarks by Anton Leis Garcia, he's director for the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, ICID. With that, I'd like to give the floor to Raga, who's director from the Development Center. Raga, the floor is yours for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and again, good afternoon and good morning to those of you in that part of the world, dear colleagues, dear participants. It's an extremely great honor to be here to open this session on domestic revenue mobilization from Addis to Seville and beyond. And I want to start by thanking my dear friend, Mr. Anton Leis Garcia, the director of ACID, the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, for his participation in this session. And I look forward to listening to his closing remarks later on. ACID is a key partner and plays a crucial role in promoting tax justice across the LAC countries and strengthening data and policy evidence across LAC and the African economies as well. Today, our focus is on domestic revenue mobilization with a specific emphasis on taxes. And this is one of the core issues that are to be addressed in the fourth International Conference on Financing for Development, the FFD4, which will take place in Seville from late June to early July, and offers a unique opportunity to renew the global financing framework and help identify effective financial mechanism to close development gaps. And to make most of this opportunity, we must arrive in Seville with clear ideas and solid evidence on ways to enhance domestic resource mobilization. And one key tool is the Global Revenue Statistics, which demonstrates the OECD's full commitment to supporting emerging and developing economies in mobilizing resources through public revenues. And public resources should be at the heart of the efforts for a sustainable development investment drive, and enhancing domestic revenue mobilization is more critical than ever for emerging and developing economies, the EMDEs. And strengthening tax systems is not just about increasing revenue. It's about securing the resources needed to drive sustainable development, to invest in infrastructure, and build resilient societies. The Global Revenue Statistics Database is a shining example of partnership between multiple organizations. It provides detailed and comparable tax revenue data for 135 economies, all the way from since 1990 and onwards. And it consolidates insights from various regional annual publications, such as the OECD revenue statistics, the revenue statistics in Africa, the revenue statistics in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the revenue statistics in Asia and the Pacific. And by covering several countries, The data set highlights key differences between developing and developed economies, not only in tax to GDP ratios, but also in the tax structures. And the disparities are striking. Tax revenues, for instance, account for less than 10% of the GDP in developing economies such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, Niger, or Somalia, while exceeding 40% in many European economies. Also, the data shows that economies in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and Asia and the Pacific rely more on revenues from taxes on goods and services and corporate income taxes, whereas OECD countries rely more on revenues from social security contributions and personal income taxes, which tend to be more progressive. High quality data, such as that provided in the global revenue statistics, supports countries in reforming their tax systems to enhance progressivity and to strengthen the capacity of the tax administrations. And this is especially crucial for countries seeking to raise their tax to GDP ratios to at least 15%, which is a priority highlighted in the draft outcome document of the FFD4 conference. Beyond providing robust evidence for policy discussions, this dataset underscores the benefits of collaboration, both within the OECD through partnerships between the OECD's Center for Tax Policy Administration, CTP, and the OECD Development Center, and also externally through cooperation with other regional and international organizations, many of which are represented here today by expert speakers. And I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the distinguished people joining our discussion here today, great experts, and allow me to mention Mr. Noel Perez Benitez. He's the chief of the Fiscal Affairs Unit at the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, UNECLAC, or CEPAL. Mr. Yuhei Chiba, who is the public sector specialist for taxation at the Asian Development Bank, and my good friend, Dr. Patrick Nzana Olomo. He is the head of the Economic Policy and Sustainable Development in the Department of Economic Development, Tourism, Trade, Industry, and Mining of the African Union Commission. And I can guarantee that the expertise and insights from these distinguished experts will be invaluable in advancing our understanding of tax policy and revenue mobilization strategies. And this collaboration is just one example of our broader efforts with the Center for Tax Policy and Administration here at the OECD. Together, we have been working extensively on critical aspects of fiscal policy, including tax morale, tax incentives, and financing social protection for informal workers. Understanding these issues comprehensively is central to creating more progressive and sustainable tax systems. So just to conclude, I would like to reiterate that the OECD Development Center is strongly committed to supporting the financing for development agenda in close collaboration, of course, with all of our international partners. And once again, my sincere thanks to all of our speakers and participants for their contributions to this discussion. And I look forward to listening and participating here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raga. So now we'll pass on to a presentation by Manuel Modica, who will introduce trends in tax and non-tax revenues across the globe between 2015 and 2022, based on data from the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative. Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Talita. Yes, so I will briefly present the Global Revenue Initiative and provide an overview of how tax revenue and domestic revenue mobilization more broadly have evolved since 2015 in economies in the Global Revenue Statistics Initiatives. Next. Okay, so like Raga has mentioned, Global Revenue Statistics, the initiative provides harmonized revenue statistics for 135 economies in Africa, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and the OECD, and all the data are free online. So it provides revenue data that is highly detailed, and they're validated by participating countries. Also provide analysis of revenue trends and of policy relevant topics. And in such, he informs tax and DRM strategy, and as well as he enables cross-country analysis and benchmarking. So the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative, it comprises 4 annual revenue statistics publications. They are produced in close partnership with a growing number of countries and with our regional partners in the different regions that I mentioned. The Global Revenue Statistics Initiative facilitates peer learning and capacity building, and this via workshop and online seminars where the participating economies and partners exchange on the production and the use of harmonized statistics to inform tax policy and DRM efforts. Next, please. So you see here our partner, and we are very grateful to our partners in Africa, in Asia, in the Pacific, and Latin America, and the Caribbean, without whom the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative would not be possible. So we are delighted to have some of our partners today for our panel discussion. Next one. So in this presentation, I'm going to show you the state of play in domestic revenue mobilization and across different regions and different groups of countries, and describe how DRM has evolved since 2015, when the last international conference on finances for development was held in Addis Ababa. So what are the main takeaways when we examine trends in DRM between 2015 and 2022? So the good news is that DRM in developing countries advanced between 2015 and 2022. But it's not enough. It was not enough to bridge the SDG financing gap. And in 8 years, the annual financing gap in developing countries increased by 60% to stand at $4 trillion in 2022. So many countries mobilized more tax revenue in 2022 than in 2015. But in 2022, many still had tax to GDP ratio below 15%. Now, when looking at income groups, lower income countries recorded the largest increase in tax revenue as a share of GDP over the period. And the progress in tax revenue mobilization has been uneven across country and over time. And the COVID-19 pandemic has set back progress in DRM across the developing countries. And this, plus with a larger debt burden, has constrained fiscal space in developing countries. Like Raga has mentioned, yes, developing countries continue to rely more on consumption taxes and corporate taxes more than the OECD countries. Next. Okay, so in this slide, you see the tax to GDP ratio in 2022 and 2015 for the 135 economies included in the Global Revenue Statistic database, and they are distributed according to their respective region. So you can see there are a significant variation in tax to GDP ratio across countries and region in 2022. Countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and in Asia and the Pacific, they tend to have lower tax to GDP ratio than OECD countries. And several countries in those regions recorded tax to GDP ratio below 15%. And 15% is often considered as a minimum benchmark from which growth and development tends to accelerate. So the proportion of countries with tax to GDP ratio below this benchmark range from half of country in Africa and above 25% in Asia and the Pacific. So globally, we've got about 25% of country that have a ratio below 15%. So just to note that tax revenue includes SSA in this graph, and then if you exclude social security contribution, you've got a bit like 30% of country below 15%. Now, when you see, you've got back to the last graph, yeah. So there is some dots, the gray dots. They are the 2015 level. You can see that when you look at you compare with the 2022 level, tax revenue increased for more than 60% of country, and this in each of the region and the OECD. Next. So this slide shows income changes in tax to GDP ratio also between 2015 and 2022 for income groups by increasing level of income. The Global Revenue Statistic Database has a good coverage of these groups. So, for example, we've got 13 low-income countries, so that's covering 50% of all low-income countries. And the coverage is 67 for lower middle income countries, 65 for upper middle income countries, and 58 for high income. And what we see in this graph is that on average, low income countries recorded the largest increase in tax revenue on average by 1 percentage point. In contrast, the lower and upper middle income countries increase their tax to GDP ratio on average by 0.8 percentage points and 0.1 percentage point respectively. Next, please. This graph shows the trends between 2013 and 2022 in the average tax to GDP ratio for the different regions. And so you see there is a general upward trajectory, but this upward trajectory was interrupted by a sharp fall in commodity prices in 2015-16 and by the COVID-19 pandemic, which began in 2020. So the impact of those events on public revenue varied by region and tended to be more pronounced in developing countries. So for example, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a reduction in tax revenue of 0.3% of GDP in Africa, 0.7% of GDP in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 1% in Asia Pacific between 2019 and 2020. And in contrast, in the OECD countries recorded an increase of 0.1 percentage point. Next one. Now, this is the trend also by income groups. And so you can see also that the tax revenue in developing countries were greatly impacted by the commodity price shock and COVID-19. So the lower and upper middle countries recorded on average the largest decrease during COVID-19, respectively 0.9% of GDP and 0.8%. And this fall was more than twice as large as was experienced during the commodity crisis. Next one, please. So this graph compares the trends in tax and non-tax revenue in Africa, including some detailed information on the composition of non-tax revenue. This is collected through revenue statistics in Africa. We also collect non-tax revenue for a majority of Asia and Pacific economies as part of these initiatives. So non-tax revenue are an important source of revenue in Africa. They have improved modestly since 2015, but over a longer time period, they've been decreasing and actually offsetting the increase in tax revenue in Africa. Next. So as Raga has mentioned, yes, another important indicator is the tax structure. This is the share of revenue generated by each tax type as a share of total tax revenue. Here you see the tax structure in 2022 across the different regions and income groups. And so as you see, the developing countries rely more on consumption taxes. There are the VAT and other taxes on goods and services, such as excise and custom duties. They are shown in green. They also rely more on corporate income tax, that's shown in dark blue. And that's compared to the OECD or high-income countries. So, on the other hand, the personal income tax in light blue and social security contribution in pink are a far larger share of the tax mix in OECD and high-income countries on average. Next. The Global Revenue Statistic Database also enables us to examine domestic tax revenue mobilization in selected groups. So we've got a coverage by more than 60% for those groups. And so you see that the seed, so the small island developing states, the landlocked developing countries, and countries in high and extreme fragility also increased their tax revenue between 2015 and 2022, but they recorded dips during the 2015-16 commodity price shock and the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can see also the tax revenue in seed tend to be extremely volatile because they are often small, less diversified economies, and they are highly sensitive to global economic fluctuation. And many of them are disproportionately affected by natural disasters. And again, for those groups, you can see that consumption taxes and corporate income tax were the main source of revenue for these groups in 2022. Next, please. So here you see the changes in tax revenue between 2015 and 2022 by main tax type. And so you can see that in all the region and most income groups, CIT was the main driver to the increase in the overall tax revenue as percentage of GDP over the period. Let's say also that the surge in commodity prices between 2021 and 2022 really contributed to this increase. This is it for me. Thanks for your attention, and we'll now move on to our panel discussion. And for this, I hand over to Talitha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And just before we move on to the panel discussion, I see that some participants joined us after the presentation started. So just a quick reminder that if you have any questions, you're welcome to submit them via the Q&A box that you'll see on the bottom of your screen. If you can identify yourself with your name, organization, and country, that will be most welcome. We'll either respond via the box, or if we have time, we'll ask the panel live. So now I'm delighted to move on to the panel discussion. It's my honor to introduce our three panelists today. Sebastian, if you can show the slide with the names. We will have Patrick Olomo. He's the head of Economic Policy and Sustainable Development Division at AUC. Then Noel Perez Benitez, he's chief of the Fiscal Affairs Unit in UNECLAC. And then Yuhei Shiba, public sector specialist on taxation at the Asian Development Bank. We'll start with Patrick. Sebastian, you can stop the screen sharing. Thank you. Patrick, let me start with the first question for you. Patrick is an important partner in our publication Revenue Statistics in Africa. So the question is, despite important progress, Africa's average tax to GDP ratio remains lower than other regional averages, as Emmanuel has just shown. Tax to GDP ratios are below 15% in many African countries. In your view, what are the key priorities to further accelerate revenue mobilization across Africa until 2030? And how can revenue statistics data and analysis help governments to implement these priorities. The floor is yours, Patrick.
Thank you very much. And Talita, would also want to, first of all, on behalf of the African Union Commission, to sincerely appreciate the OECD Development Center and the OECD at large for the cooperation that we are having together. And thanks to the kind words of Raga in her, inceptional speech, in which she highlighted the cooperation that we are having together. So thanks for that. And thanks also to Emmanuel for the very eloquent presentation that he just concluded. What I want to say, and I have to be clear on our perspective in terms of domestic resource mobilization. If you look at the international context today, you will see that there is no other option for African countries than increasing their levels of domestic resource mobilization. I say this because when you look at the data, you will see that there is an important decrease in ODA. There is a decrease also in the, the foreign direct investments that are flowing into the continent, which leaves us with only one solution, which is domestic resource mobilization. And in the context of Agenda 2063, we have estimated that there is need for us to provide, 70% or 75% of the funding that we have with domestic resources. This is to ensure sustainability and to ensure that we are able to implement the important programs of Agenda 2063, our transformative program towards economic transformation. And in that perspective, when you look at the levels of domestic resource mobilization today, you will see, and it was highlighted, that we are, below the 15% range compared to the GDP, and this is lower than in other regions in the world. What we are trying to do with the revenue statistics, as you ask, it is a tool for us to sensitize our member states in terms of the policies that needs to be implemented to accelerate domestic resource mobilization within the continent. And in that perspective, we have adopted 3 years back 2 important strategies that are the tax and domestic resource mobilization strategy and the IFF strategy. Focusing on the tax strategy, we have 4 pillars that are of great importance. The first pillar is to increase domestic resource mobilization within the continent. And in that, we are working with our member states to enhance tax policy and tax administration and to optimize revenue collections in our countries. And in this, you can see that we have been able to, work with them with a view to widening the tax base, because that is an important point that we need to concentrate on. There is, a massive informal sector that is offsetting, the resources and the revenue that we can mobilize to finance our economy. So one of the first key action that we are making, that we are putting, on the table with our member states, is to make sure that we are able to widen the tax base and to reduce the spread of the informal sector. Secondly, we have a pillar that is aimed at tackling illicit financial flows. And when we talk about illicit financial flows, we are, talking about an hemorrhage of resources that is approximately estimated at $89 billion US dollars per year. You see that if we are able to make the most of those resources that are equivalent to what was, provided in the international development assistance for its 20th replenishment, the IDA 20, you can see that per year we have the resources that are needed to finance some of the programs that we have within the continent. And there is a multiplier effect that can be, that can be generated with the resources that we can mobilize domestically to finance our project. So here we are trying to address, the leakages that we see in our tax administrations and in various other administrative processes that are, favoring illicit financial flows, because we are absolutely convinced that those resources, if we are transparent enough, can fuel our development. The third pillar is about enhancing tax administration effectiveness. And in this, we are working with member states to modernize revenue collection systems to ensure that they are digitalized and responding to the need of the 21st century in terms of, domestic resource mobilization. And here we see a huge amount of resources that can be mobilized if the digital economy is effectively taxed in our jurisdictions. Because if you look at what we have at hand today, you will see that we are absolutely very far below the level of revenue that can be mobilized in the digital sector. Lastly, the last pillar is about enhancing tax administration. It's about increasing Africa's voice in the global tax discussions. And we say this because when you look at the tax systems today, you can clearly understand that there is need for improvement, there is need for reforms that are going to make the tax systems that are operating today more efficient, more inclusive, more transparent, and also more effective in terms of, revenue collection and, channeling of those revenues in the development spheres. And in that, we have been at the African Union spearheading the reform of the international tax system with the support that we are providing to our member states at the UN for the United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. For us, we do believe that this is the right actions to be undertaken, because this is providing a global tax system that is aimed at addressing, important issues such as illicit financial flows, I already spoke about, addressing also issues of cross-border services, issues relating to the taxation of the digital economy, and issues also relating to dispute settlement, just to name some few, important points that can be addressed with the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. So this is what we are trying to do, and that is why our main focus today, considering, the geopolitical tensions that are looming, everywhere, and the consequences that we see in terms of revenues collection and in terms of revenue that are coming to our countries. So revenue statistics for us is absolutely an important driver that is setting the tone for our member states to understand that there is need for them to concentrate on revenue, and also providing some of the key, important recommendations that can be tabled to member states with regards to the reforms that are needed. But as you can see, the project, revenue statistics is fully aligned, with our domestic resource mobilization strategy, because the pillars that I just exposed are effectively responding to the challenges of increasing domestic resource mobilization in Africa to support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, as was said. Because when you look at the gaps today in terms of financing the Sustainable Development Goals, you can see that the only option that is remaining is to secure domestic resources that are channeled to finance those important, areas. So that is what we are doing at the African Union, and we are absolutely convinced that with the support of all the stakeholders that are connected with us, we have the OECD already collaborating with us on revenue statistics, and also with the support of the international community. And I think even at the G20, we have that same sense of consensus on the need for improving domestic resource mobilization and harnessing those domestic resources for Africa's development. Let me stop here and maybe wait if there is another set of questions that I can provide answers to. So thank you very much, and over to you, Talita.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much. This was most interesting. Now, I give the floor to Noel, who is our partner in revenue statistics in Latin America and the Caribbean. Noel, the question we have for you is, we've seen that on average, Latin America and the Caribbean countries made good progress between 1990 and 2015 in increasing their tax to GDP ratios, but this progress seems to have stalled since 2015. So in your view, what have been the three main challenges since then to progressing domestic revenue mobilization in LAC? And what measures could countries take to increase DRM? And how can countries use revenue statistics data and analysis to support such efforts? Noel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Talita. And hello to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be participating as the representative of UNECLAC in this version of the Tax and Development Days. And thank you to the OECD for the invitation and for the great partnership that we have in this project, revenue statistics, going further back close to 14 years. We're very excited because we're going to present the next edition of the revenue statistics for Latin America and the Caribbean in May here in Santiago at the fiscal seminar, as we've done during very many years. So we're looking forward to that. And as Emmanuel mentioned in her presentation, there are many differences between the regions in terms of tax revenues. And in our case in Latin America and the Caribbean, what we've seen for close to a decade is that tax revenue, have stagnated at around 21% of GDP, and they've been in that level for close to 10 years. But it's important to realize that there are strong differences within the regions, within the countries in the region. So we have countries with tax revenues below 15% of GDP, between 13 and 15% of GDP. And we have other countries that have tax revenues of between 29 and 33% of GDP. So we're talking of a very different, heterogeneous set of countries here in the region. And that's important to analyze what are the main challenges in the region to mobilize domestic revenues, and specifically tax revenues, and the opportunities to improve this mobilization. And going directly to your question, Talita, there are two main challenges that we see in the region. The first one is that this the average low level of tax revenues has a lot to do with the amount of resources that we lose or forego in terms of revenue. And just to give you an example, here at ECLAC, we estimate tax evasion in the region, mostly focused on VAT and income taxes. And it represents, our last estimation from 2023, it represents close to 6.7% of regional GDP. This is about $433 billion. It is a huge amount of resources that we're losing through evasion in the region. And this is not the only source of leakage, as Patrick mentioned, that it's also an important issue in Africa. We also have an issue with tax expenditures. Our estimates of tax expenditures in the region gives us an average of around 3.7% of GDP. And the issue is that we don't really know if these tax expenditures are effective in achieving their objectives. So this is foregone revenue that we're leaving on the table, right? And the second main challenge that we see, and is also related to the presentation and a point that Emmanuel did several times, is that our tax structures tend to be biased towards consumption taxes. They represent around 50% of GDP. So just by their nature, they are regressive. So our tax structure is more biased towards the regressive side than, for example, the tax structure of the OECD. And with these two issues, we see that the opportunities for the region to strengthen resource mobilization and specifically tax revenues, well, definitely they have to go through reducing evasion. And there's been work that has been advanced a lot in the region, mostly I would say on the VAT side with electronic invoicing and so on, but also on the income tax. However, we have some structural issues in the region, like a very large informal workforce. So that's something where we need to keep working as a region. But evasion and tax expenditure, these are two topics that we have seen continuously show up in recent tax reforms in the region. There's a strong interest in countries in the region also to strengthen their evaluation processes of tax expenditures in order to reform them. And just to give you an example why these orders of magnitudes are quite important. I said that tax evasion is around 6.7% of GDP. Tax expenditure represent around 3.7% of GDP. The average tax reform in the region for the last few years has yielded around 1.5% of GDP in additional revenues. So we see that working on reducing evasion and tax expenditures could go a very long way forward, right? It could yield a lot of revenue into our ministries of finance and tax authorities. And the other issue where we have focused a lot is on the progressivity side. So the importance of strengthening, especially the personal income tax, which in the region represents around 2% of GDP, while the OECD average is around 8.3% of GDP. So we have a huge gap over there. For example, also in property taxes, where in the region we collect around 0.9% of GDP, while in the OECD the average is around 1.9% of GDP. And with this in mind, I think that revenue statistics, the analysis that we do jointly, specifically in the case for Latin America and the Caribbean, it's a very strong tool. It's the benchmark which countries use to compare themselves to other countries in the region and in other regions in the world, and it's the basis of the majority of country analysis and regional analysis that we have in Latin America. And I think it's very important, an issue a topic that was mentioned in Raga's presentation. This wouldn't be possible if we didn't have the partnership that we have with the OECD, with the IDB, and with CIAT and ECLAC, and of course the funding that we've been getting from donors, in this case in Latin America from the Spanish cooperation, from ICID. This is fundamental because this is the only way to be able to maintain such a rigorous database and analysis that is consistent throughout time and that can be validated with regional actors and also with country authorities. So that's my intervention, and I'm also open for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noel. Finally, we'll hear from Yuhei. He's our partner, one of our partners in revenue statistics in Asia and the Pacific. So Yuhei, our question for you is that we've seen that Asia Pacific as a region as a whole displayed strong economic growth between 2015 and 2022. So I'd like to ask, to what extent have tax revenues kept pace with this economic growth? How was this achieved, and what have been the key drivers of progress across the Asia Pacific region? Are there any success stories that you could that could be expanded or replicated in other countries and regions? The floor is yours for answering. Thank you.
Thank you, Talita. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. Thanks. So before I begin, thank you for OECD colleagues for organizing this event, and thank you for all the partnership with OECD, including the revenue statistics, which is very crucial for us. Yeah, so on behalf of ADB, I extend my appreciation to that. So directly going to your question about the tax revenue trends in Asia and the Pacific, looking at the revenue statistics, the average tax to GDP ratio in the region was 17.3% in 2015 and 17.8% in 2022. While the overall figure suggests that tax revenue growth has kept pace with GDP growth, some economies are consistently below 15% benchmark. And additionally, there is volatility during the pandemic. Especially tax revenue in South Asia region experienced the largest percentage decline in 2020 compared with all other regions. Although 2022 was a year of recovery in tax revenue, looking through the lens of pre- and post-pandemic comparison, it's less optimistic picture because some economies have yet to return to their pre-pandemic level. So given these trends, the progress on DRM is still ongoing and further efforts are required to accelerate our engagement on this front. And having said that, when looking at individual cases, many economies in the region are making significant progresses. And it's difficult to define what the key driver is because all the efforts are interconnected with each other. But I talk about a few examples of key areas that have driven the DRM promotion. The first is transforming tax system into the one with greater efficiency, reduced distortion. Rationalizing and streamlining the excessive and ineffective tax expenditure is a critical step toward making the tax system more efficient. And this is particularly important in VAT, where many economies are moving toward broad-based single rate regime. And second, I should mention the digital transformation of tax administration. The benefit of digitalization is not just enhancing the efficiency of revenue bodies operation, but simplifying the procedures, reducing the compliance cost, and increase the transparency. And ultimately, it fosters greater voluntary compliance. So it fundamentally reshapes the tax administration. And last but not least, the expansion of international tax cooperation. More and more economies are joining the international framework, such as MAC, Global Forum, BEPS Inclusive Framework. By strengthening the capacity to utilize ITC instruments, especially the exchange of information, addressing BEPS, and optimizing tax treaties, it all helps enhancing the ability to combat cross-border tax evasion or tax avoidance. And this contributes to the stronger domestic resource mobilization and also ensure the fair and transparent tax system. And then finally, the successful stories. I believe the successful case is leveraging the assessment tool, such as TADAT and tax expenditure analysis, to identify their priorities and then implement reforms on the basis of the assessment. Also, these efforts should be guided by well-planned, politically committed strategies, such as medium-term revenue strategies, and also supported by policy reform assistance from development partners. When these development partners' assistance and committed plans and diagnostic tools are well aligned, it creates synergy to enable effective and structural reforms. For example, ADB's DRM engagement in Philippines is closely aligned with their multi-year reform initiatives. ADB has supported the tax policy reform and digital transformation initiative. And also, a TADAT assessment was conducted twice in 2015 and 2023, which helped refine their priorities. And the findings from 2023 TADAT assessment have been incorporated into our policy-based lending programs. And now the reform is being promoted. So this is one of the cases which implement structured reform. ADB, through Asia Pacific Tax Hub, continues to leverage the diagnostic assessment tools and also collaborating with development partners, including OECD, to support developing economies to strengthening their institutional capacity with tailored approaches. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuhei, and thank you really to Patrick and Noel as well. It's really fascinating to hear all of you discussing the state of DRM across different regions, because we've seen in Emmanuel's presentation that tax to GDP ratios vary a lot across different regions, across Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. But in your remarks, we've seen that there are many challenges that are shared. All of you spoke about the importance of reducing leakages to promote domestic resource mobilization. Also the structural challenges that can be a burden for domestic resource mobilization, such as the size of informal sector in many developing countries across different regions. And finally, all of you spoke about the role of data, of evidence to advocate and support DRM efforts. We're really grateful for all of your remarks, because we've seen that despite different data and progress in DRM across different regions, we realize that DRM is still very important for all countries across the globe. And that leads us to the closing of our session. We unfortunately won't have time for questions and answers. If any participant has any questions to ask us, you're welcome to write to the email revenuestatistics@oecd.org. But I thought it could be very good to go to the concluding remarks by Director Anton Leis Garcia from OECD. As you know, Spain will be hosting the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. And DRM is going to be an important issue discussed during the conference in June. And we're very keen to hear from OECD on their views on DRM ahead of this important event. So if I can call on Director Leis to speak, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Talita. Thank you very much to OECD colleagues, to the Development Center, and to CTP for convening this meeting, and to all the actors, all the colleagues that spoke before me. Indeed, we are just hosting the meeting. It's a UN conference, a very important one, important for financing development broadly. In a context of difficulties, we are seeing an increase in funding needs. It's already, and this I think are OECD estimates, 4 trillion a year, the deficit in financing the SDGs, and at the same time we see dwindling ODA budgets, or aid budgets. That's not the case in Spain. We are growing. We feel sometimes like the salmon swimming upstream. I had to say that at the OECD recently in a report on fragility. We are proud of that because we think overseas development assistance and more generally international development cooperation is an investment in a safer world, an investment in a more resilient world. So certainly an investment that pays off for the countries and the communities where we work, but also for our own people at home. Now, the reality is that these resources are less and less, more and more precious, and we have taken the bet that more and more we need to use those resources to unlock other resources that are crucial for financing development or sustainable development. And frankly, I think the most important of those is domestic resource mobilization. There is no country in the world that wants to be dependent on aid or foreign assistance. And I think more and more I see the role of development agencies and of these scarce resources from donor countries as key to unlock those other resources, and in particular to boost domestic resource mobilization. I was hearing the colleagues before, they mentioned the importance of data, of having good data on where these revenues are, and that is why we've been supporting the work of the OECD on that, on revenue statistics, and our colleagues in ECLAC, in Latin America and the Caribbean, of course, very important. And I think we need to boost domestic resource mobilization. We need countries to collect more taxes. And I think it's very difficult to generalize. If you look at the different regions, your colleagues mentioned the data. We are seeing countries that collect If I take Latin America that have revenue collection over 30% of GDP, there we are talking about improving the effectiveness of public spending, probably. But there are others, and generally across developing countries, countries need to collect more taxes. That's clear. And also to tackle some of the issues that are related to domestic resource mobilization. We're talking about fairness. Tax systems tend to be regressive. They are quite narrow. They need to be broadened. And this is not just for financing sustainable development and you know, the triple transition in Spain. We look at our development strategy as fostering a social, economic, and ecological transition across the world. These transitions are expensive. They need investment. They, of course, the lion's share would be from the private sector. There is no question about that, but we need a public sector that leads, and that you know, these transitions are expensive. They are a very valuable investment, but we need more domestic resource mobilization. And then there are issues that are development challenges that are relevant as well, and I think the colleagues were mentioning it as well. We need tax systems that are broad and that are progressive, because we need solid institutions, and we need democracies, or you know, stable political and social contracts that support the development efforts. And we need competitive economies. So we need tax systems that foster economic activity, that foster competitiveness, that tackle the question of informality and so on. So bottom line, we see you know, domestic resource mobilization and promoting just, inclusive, effective tax systems as a crucial development challenge. And I think in Seville, we are going to be talking a lot about that. If you look at the declaration, actually, you know, tax systems, domestic resource mobilization is front and center, and it's actually the first item on the agenda. And in a context where, frankly, different donors are reducing their overseas development assistance, is even more important. We are doing a lot, and I think you know, some colleagues alluded to that. We are working on let's say, on fostering international tax cooperation, and we're happy to support the Global Forum on Tax Transparency, but we are also working with Spanish actors on strengthening the tax systems of our partner countries, and in particular Latin American and Caribbean countries, on fiscal justice, on domestic resource mobilizations. Since 2023, we've been working on a regional approach on the implementation of tax standards, as I said, with exchange of information, exchanging different experiences. That's, of course, very important, but also working bilaterally and with the Development Center, and that's one of our strategic partners, on the design of a new initiative on tax justice in Latin America and the Caribbean, which for us is part of a broader program on democracy. Because, again, I want to underline, this is not just about collecting more resources to finance sustainable development. It is about building inclusive political and socio-economic systems that foster, in this case, democracy in Latin America. In November 2024, we co-organized with the OECD a meeting on our training center in Montevideo in Uruguay to promote this initiative on tax justice with other actors, including ECLAC, that represented here, civil society, Oxfam in this case, and our Institute of Fiscal Studies, that is our think tank and training center for tax officials in Spain and also abroad. It is very crucial to continue promoting these efforts. We are not alone in this. I know other donors, other development actors are underscoring the importance of promoting effective, progressive tax systems. Much more important in the current context, and that is what I want to leave you with, is this work has always been very important. The work on data, the work on building the capacity of tax administrations and fiscal systems, on how to improve the effectiveness of spending, how to collect, how to increase the fairness and effectiveness of overall tax systems. But it's much more important in the current geopolitical context, in where we are seeing volatile trade and investment flows, where we are seeing ODA reducing in many parts of the world. So traveling to several countries, and over the last 2 weeks I've been in Africa, in Ethiopia and Mali, I heard self-reliance as a key word. And I think more and more we are going to need tax administrations, tax systems, fiscal systems, domestic resource mobilization systems, because that also includes financial sectors and deep financial markets in countries. We are going to need much more domestic sources to finance sustainable development. And for that, we are ready to play a role. Spain will do so through our development cooperation system. And I'm sure other actors will do so as well, because this is more important than ever before. And I applaud the work of the OECD, the Development Center, the Center for Tax Policy and Administration, and also the other colleagues that spoke, because this is absolutely crucial.
Thank you very much, Director Leis. And I'd like to thank as well IAC for all the support you've given to revenue statistics, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are over time, so we will post online the presentation that Emmanuel gave with all the links where you can find the different reports and databases. And Sebastian, go to the next slide, please. And I'd just like to end, next one. And just like to end, thanking all partners that have supported global revenue statistics over the years, especially partners in the donor communities. We have IAC, but also governments from the Netherlands, Norway, Luxembourg, Japan, Ireland, Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, UK, and also the EU. Thank you very much for all of your support. And thanks to our panelists and to participants for joining us for today's session. Stay connected for the next session of the Text and Development Days. Thank you and goodbye.